We now have a session which allows you to have your say, express your thoughts on the world of anti-doping, in particular the revised code. And this current session leading up to lunch will involve the sports movement. I'm going to invite the first speaker from the sports movement to actually address from the lectern, and that's Professor Arne Lundqvist, who is, as you know, the Vice President of WADA and the President of the IOC Medical Commission, and a man, of course, with a lifetime of experience in anti-doping. Thank you, Professor Lundqvist.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ministers, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to give some introductory remarks on behalf of the sports movement with respect to what we have just heard and with respect to the code as such. You've already heard from the IOC President earlier today that the Olympic movement is supporting what we have before us in terms of a revised code. It is particularly easy for me to agree to his support, having been involved in anti-doping since more than 40 years, and almost 30 of them without a code. That was an interesting period in my life, from the 1970s and another 2-3 decades until the code came about. When what was in place, you may wonder, at that time? Well, not very much, really. There were sort of arbitrary rules in various sports organizations, in different rules in different countries, if any. And when we tried to conduct a fight against doping, we were repeatedly ended up in courts of various kinds and had problems in explaining our anti-doping fight and the validity and importance of it. I can describe those years as chaos. There wasn't even a court of arbitration for sport. It came about in the late 1980s and was firmly established not until 1994. So there were decades, which were not easy to cope with in terms of a sports leader trying to conduct a fight against doping in an efficient way. Actually, the absence of a universal rule for anti-doping was one of the main reasons for the creation of WADA back in 1999. And I must commend WADA and the leadership at that time that they did actually establish a universal code in a record time, in 4 years. As has been said here, we had a code before us at the Copenhagen conference in 2003, and it was made compulsory for the Olympic movement just before the Summer Olympic Games 2004 in Athens. And in a few years, our partner in WADA, the public authorities, took their initiative and organized the support of the code in terms of a UNESCO convention, which made the code supported by the governments around the world. And in 2007, when the UNESCO convention came into force, since then we have had this code, which is universal, which covers the whole world and the whole sporting world. And it's a miracle to one who has been fighting back in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s without such a regulation in support of what we try to do. Of course, an exercise like the one we have witnessed cannot make everyone happy in every respect. I believe that there are people who have their issues that have not been addressed, perhaps in the way you wished in the code. That includes me personally. But I think the overall result is remarkable progress and improvement. The code from 2003 was already quite an achievement, as I mentioned, a major progress in the fight against doping. amended that it was a few years later, and as from 2009, and now we have a code that will be applicable from 2015, which is again amended, improved, and will serve our purpose for an efficient fight against doping. I would like to finish by commending the code review team, Rich Young, Ulrich Haas, and their people for having done a tremendous job. And the end result we have is, in the view of sports movement, a real good result, an exemplary result, and we are grateful to you for having put this enormous effort into such an important work, and which will certainly serve the purpose of an efficient fight against doping even more in the future. So thank you very much for having done this, and with those words I wish to explain again the support from the sports movement and the Olympic movement in particular of the amended code that we have before us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lundquist. I'm told that the translation booth is not operating with a technical hitch, so they're working on it. So please be patient, and hopefully it'll come back on soon for those that need that support from the interpreters. My next speaker is former ISC Foundation President, and of course Foundation Board member still, and ISC member, Mr. Richard Pound. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. There was once an apocryphal philosophy examination at McGill University in which there was a single question, which was, what do you know for sure? And it's not a bad question for us to pose to ourselves on the occasion of the 4th World Conference on Doping in Sport. So in that context, what do we know for sure? Quite a lot, in fact. First, that doping in sport continues to exist. Second, that there is no convincing evidence that the incidence of doping in sport is any less today than it was when WADA was created. Third, that more dopers do not get caught than do get caught. Fourth, that the overwhelming majority of dopers who get caught via tests and investigations are not accidental dopers. Fifth, that doping methods and applications are more sophisticated than ever before. Sixth, that professionals, both medical and scientific, are increasingly involved in doping activities. Seventh, that existing science is sufficiently robust to detect virtually all known substances and methods. Eighth, that on the other hand, athletes like Armstrong, Jones, Montgomery, and others doped regularly in the course of their athletic careers, but never tested positive. Ninth, that there are no incentives for stakeholders to catch anyone. Anti-doping organizations seem to have concerns regarding possible adverse impact on the reputation of sport. NADOs have no general interest in identifying national athletes as dopers. WADA suffers from chronic and deliberate underfunding by its stakeholders. And governments have no particular general interest in identifying national athletes as dopers. 10th, we know that WADA stakeholders have set code
mine's working, but I'm clearly yours has stopped deco. Perhaps one next door, if you can perhaps swap seats. I'm sorry. Thank you, Adam.
Number 11, that no importance is given to measuring code compliance on the basis of effectiveness of anti-doping programs, as opposed to merely administering tests, most of which are highly unlikely to be effective. 12th, that government standards for UNESCO Convention compliance are ridiculously low, as are monitoring activities. 13th, that stakeholders and sanctioning powers are reluctant to assume their responsibilities, including ADOs with respect to athletes and national federations, the IOC itself regarding non-compliant ADOs and countries, and thirdly, governments with respect to member states that are non-compliant. 14th, and serious, is that there's an increasing involvement of organized crime in sport doping. 15th, we know that there are barriers to the efficient exchange of relevant information between sport and public authorities. 16th, that ADO anti-doping activity is in reality far less than it is asserted to be by the ADOs. 17th, and unfortunately, doping does, in fact, work for purposes of increased performance on the field of play. Athletes know this. Sports officials know this. 18th, almost all of the concerted resistance to improving the fight against doping in sport is generated from within sport itself, the very constituency that should be the most concerned with the integrity of sport. Well, Mr. Chairman, knowing what we know is one thing, but it leads to another question. What is the next paradigm shift required to improve the fight against doping in sport? Human nature being what it is, we may need a new crisis of the magnitude of the Festina scandal in 1998 during the Tour de France, although one hopes it will not once again involve cycling, in order to generate a new commitment to doping-free sport. It need not, however, require a crisis if our fellow participants at the 4th World Conference on Doping in Sport are willing to make new commitments to our stated mutual objectives. Stated commitments must be followed by action. We already have had enough talk, and the list is not long. First, each stakeholder shall fully assume and execute its responsibilities and be prepared to be monitored accordingly. 2, anti-doping programs shall be implemented and monitored against a matrix of effectiveness, not mere statistics. 3rd, education shall be combined with effective deterrence and detection. 4th, all stakeholders shall act and coordinate to ensure fully transparent outcomes. And 5th, required resources for effective anti-doping programs shall be provided on a timely and predictable basis. We have, Mr. Chairman, an opportunity here in Johannesburg to turn a new page. Let us take advantage of this opportunity with a new declaration, perhaps the Johannesburg Declaration, of our renewed commitment to a more effective fight against doping in sport. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pound. Subject to the support of our technical people, the next intervention is going to come following a video. So could we have the video before I invite Mr. Philippe Conteponi to address the conference?
My name is Felipe Conteponi. I'm from Argentina and I play rugby. I've been playing professional rugby for 13 years. Personally, what I remember best games were when I get to the game, knowing that you've done all what you could in terms of preparation, and then you trust on what you've done. Doping, I think it's prevalent in any sport, you know. You like to think that you're competing against people in your same state, you know, clean. We need a lot more of education in the players, in the athletes, in the players about doping, you know. But I think we are getting there, and we are starting to understand the importance of it. Sometimes we kind of give a prize to someone that is clean, but it should be the other way around. That should be the normal. That should be, everyone should be doing that. It's not something extraordinary, but it's what you should be doing, you know. And we should penalize the cheaters, you know. That's maybe.
Hello, my name is Felipe Contebomi. It's a privilege to be with you here in Johannesburg and to offer my intervention and my passion towards the anti-doping issue. I grew up in Buenos Aires in a very sporty family. I've played 4 Rugby World Cups and I have served as an ambassador for the IRB Keep Rugby Clean anti-doping campaign since 2009. For the past 2 years, I have been part of WADA's Athlete Committee. The committee has offered me a unique opportunity to work with fellow athletes from different sports and disciplines to discuss the anti-doping issues and also to be involved with the code review process. From my perspective, you can only control the controllable, and that's your own preparation and all the hard work you're ready to put in it. And as a clean athlete, you want to believe that you are competing against other athletes in your same state, clean. To think of competition in any other way really removes the magic of what sports is meant to be. We must provide for more education and focus on prevention. Young players need to understand the risk and consequences of cheating. Athletes need to know the health risk of what they put into their body. Sometimes ignorance or ambition leads young players to take substances that can cause health problems, both immediate and long-term. And that's why educational programs need to help players to make wise decisions. Today, I'm at the end of my sporting career, and as a medical doctor, I will always have a passion for sport, and I plan to stay involved at a different level. I hope to continue to contribute as much as I can to keeping this magical thing called sport as clean as possible, because that is what sport is, magic. Together, we need to work as one to ensure that those magical moments of sporting glory are owned by hard-working, gifted athletes and not cheaters. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe, and thank you for the contribution you make to the WADA Athlete Committee. The next intervention is from Mr. Vlad Marinescu, the Director General of Sport Accord. Please proceed.
Thank you. So, dear presidents and representatives of international sport federations and organizations, dear ministers and representatives of governments, dear delegates and participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Sport Accord President Mr. Marius Wieser, I would like to thank and congratulate all stakeholders involved on all levels of their contribution to the fight against doping. Sport Accord, if you don't know, is the union of 109 Olympic and non-Olympic international sport federations and international organizations. And I can tell you today that supporting our members in the fight against doping is a top priority. Sport Accord Doping-Free Sport Unit has been working in close cooperation with the IOC and WADA for the past 5 years, and today is providing information and services to members to support them in code compliance, operating a support and assistance hotline, extranet platform, scientific and legal consultancy, administration of anti-doping panels, education seminars, and more. Due to the development of a highly specialized and professional team, additionally, we are supporting over 25 international federations by operating their anti-doping programs in part or in full, from testing, therapeutic use exemptions, and education to results management. As President Bach said earlier during the opening of the World Conference, it's all about the athlete. And in this regard, it is paramount that the cooperation between all stakeholders must always keep in mind and take into account, at the heart of the story, the protection of clean athletes, and only in doing this can we reach very positive results. Sport Accord believes in taking anti-doping to the next level and making our approach more targeted, effective, and intelligent to result in higher cost efficiencies. It is important to always keep in mind the financial implications and their effects on the international federations. We would like to thank the co-drafting team who have gathered the proposed changes and carried out the difficult task of consolidating sometimes diverging opinions. The the changes in the World Anti-Doping Code will better empower us to deal with issues that are present today, and implementing the recommendations from the world sports movement will mold the code to fit its scope, which in 2 days' time will arrive at the resolution to be adopted, the revised code for 2015. In closing, Nelson Mandela said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." I would like to inform you that Sport Accord will continue to expand its current anti-doping activities. However, we will put a specific emphasis, in close cooperation with international federations and partners, on education and prevention. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Marinescu. I now invite Dr. Jiří Dvořák, the Chief Medical Officer of FIFA, to address the conference.
Thank you, Chairman. I am a little stressed with this timing on the front desk, but however, I will try to make it in 3 minutes. Now, FIFA, jointly with the International Team Sports Federation, carefully studied the different drafts of the World Anti-Doping Code 2015. The queries has been considered and satisfactorily included into the current code to be approved. FIFA endorse and support the code, including the 4-year sanctions for severe violation of the anti-doping code, such as abuse of anabolic steroids, hormones, and EPO. We also endorse the individual case management of cases of violation, including the use and abuse of social drugs, including marijuana. FIFA and football since 2005 oversees 250,000 samples with overall incidence of positive cases 0.4%. Half of them are going on the account of marijuana. The severe violation are incidents such as anabolic steroids of 0.02%. So we know what we are talking about. Yes, we believe to quality over quantity, taking into account the cost efficiency. The biological profile might be a possible way, however, have to be tested and analyzed by scientists, clinicians, laboratory experts. We have to work together as a team to reach the proofs that this might be the way to go. The FIFA World Cup 2014 is our testing ground. We started to collect blood and urine samples already 2011 in the different FIFA competition, and will test all players participating in the period 6 months prior to the World Cup, and of course during the final competition in Brazil. We are in process to develop more deterrent and cost-effective system. We share the opinion of the IOC President, Thomas Bach, that we have to invest in the future. For the anti-doping strategy, for the World Cup, we invest approximately $1 million. We will share our experience with the sporting community, government, and also media shortly after the final whistle in Rio de Janeiro. Now, a word to the governments. Please make sure that the laboratories in your countries fulfill the WADA requirements so we can use them during major competitions. That is helpful for our organization and logistics. Some of you might imagine, give me 30 seconds please, the infrastructure and costs needed to send samples daily from the different 12 venues in Brazil to Lausanne during the World Cup 2014. But we all also agree that false positive and even false negative case would be detrimental for the world anti-doping strategy. I hope that our decision from FIFA will facilitate the project and the program for the IOC, and that you might benefit from our unfortunate experience for the Olympic Games 2016 in Rio de Janeiro. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuji. I now invite ISC member, Executive and Foundation Board member of WADA and President of International Tennis Federation, Francesco Ricci Beattie, to address the conference.
Thanks. Very shortly, I have two general remarks and two specific ones. The general one echo some other intervention. Thanks very much the code review team. They've done a great job. This is a great step forward in the fight against doping, and I believe, especially in terms of the regulatory environment. I want to spend one word to thank the ASOIF, the Association of the Olympic Federations that I represent here, and I speak on behalf of the ASOIF medical group that was surely a great contributor to this review of the code. The second remark, general remark, is that I believe the real challenge of all the doping system in the near future is the cooperation, a more effective cooperation than it is now between the major stakeholder of this activity, the International Federation and the national agency. Only with transparency and cooperation we could get better. The specific remarks are related to the additional cost and activity in terms of result management that the International Federation has accepted as positive, even if we monitor, because the resources are not unlimited, and we have to be aware that the resources to doping, devoted to doping, are taken away from the development of our sport. And the second is a better definition. These are the 2 points that we will monitor in the next future. We also accept very well the event testing new rules, but with a clear point on the event venue that has been mentioned this morning by Richard Young. We would like very clearly to keep the principle to respect the athlete, that the authority testing in competition should be unique. Thanks a lot, Mr. President.
Thank you, Francesco. Next, the President of the World Association of Anti-Doping Scientists and also head of the WADA accredited laboratory in Barcelona, Professor Jordi Segura.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The present revision of the code maintains and expands the importance of the WADA accredited anti-doping laboratories as a cornerstone in the fight against doping. This is a selected group of high-performance scientific centers who have assembled in the World Association of Anti-Doping Scientists, also called the WATS, a unique organization assuring the maximum level of optimal science for the world of anti-doping. WATS is a professional organization whose membership comprises scientists from around the world working full-time in the area of anti-doping analysis. As long-term stakeholders in the global anti-doping efforts, WATS endeavors to make the science and reliability of anti-doping methods robust and acceptable. WATS expertise is the greatest single scientific resource available to anti-doping stakeholders. Obviously, as any human activity, occasionally the work of an individual laboratory may need to be critically scrutinized. A harmonized activity between WATS itself and any disciplinary commission in WADA must be clearly defined. Unfortunately, and for the sake of transparency, neither the composition nor the methodology of such disciplinary commission is so far defined in the code. Anti-doping laboratory analyses are a vital part of the World Anti-Doping Program. Most of the adverse doping cases are the results of highly qualified analytical expertise within the laboratories. Emerging monitoring by the laboratories also identifies new trends to combat doping. With the recent implementation of the Athlete's Biological Passport and its interpretation, the experience of the anti-doping laboratories is needed more than ever. And last but not least, the efficient sharing of knowledge is actualized as the vast majority of published research on anti-doping science involves WATS members. WATS does not receive any external financial support, which avoids any conflict of interest when advising on a case. In addition to the enormous daily work, laboratories represented in WATS also support global anti-doping efforts by paying to WADA around $200,000 for accreditation fees. In summary, WATS is eager to contribute with its knowledge and reliability to the excellence of the fight against doping, not only to WADA, but to international federations, national anti-doping organizations, national Olympic committees, and the Court of Arbitration for Sport. In case of any difficult situation involving the need of scientific clarification in anti-doping, please do not hesitate to come to WATS. We will be more than pleased to advise and collaborate with any of you that might require our cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordi. Our next intervention comes from a former Paralympic gold medal winner and the chairperson of the International Paralympic Committee Athletes Council, Todd Nicholson. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Todd Nicholson. I'm the chairman of the International Paralympic Committee's Athletes Council. As an elected group of athletes who aim to be the collective voice of the Paralympic athletes within the Paralympic movement, I would like to thank WADA for this opportunity, and on behalf of the athletes within the Paralympic movement, would like to thank WADA, the IOC, and the IPC on the efforts to improve education, communication, system access, and processes to ensure sport remains clean and safe for everyone. However, from my own personal perspective and the perspective of Paralympic athletes around the world, so much more can be done, not just by WADA, the IOC, or IPC, but by all stakeholders involved in sport. And as the code has evolved over the years to reflect the advancements in doping, so has the need for athletes and nations to be successful. The incentive to win gold or be successful has never been greater, and so have the risks. When I first joined and started competing in sports, I was told that I was responsible for the products that I put into my body. It was hammered into me that I should be cautious about taking anything that would make me feel better or perform better or give me the results that I thought I might be able to achieve. Although this advice, when I originally started, was very basic, I was one of the lucky ones. There are thousands of athletes around the world who have never been given the anti-doping advice whatsoever. As the chair of the body that represents all those athletes, that greatly concerns me. There may be more communication and education material available than ever before. However, can we all certainly say that we are doing absolutely everything we can to ensure that athletes, all over around the world, are getting the information they required on anti-doping in a way that is accessible to all, for all? What if we were to ask some retiring athletes whether they felt they were provided with sufficient guidance during their athletic careers? Did their coach, trainer, doctor, NSO, NOC, NATO, NPC, or IF provide them with the information that they require? For the newer athletes that are coming onto the scene, and they are coming on every day, are we 100% confident that we are being advised on when and where to get the information about WADA and the code? Do they know how to read? Do they know where or how to find the information required? For the new athletes coming onto the scene, are we 100%? Do they know where to get it? Unfortunately, I suspect the answer to most of these questions, if not all of them, is no. That is why education and communication is something that should never stop. It should be an ongoing process, accessible to all around the world, and not just something you are told on the first day of joining a national team, like I was. As stated earlier, the responsibility to educate and communication does not lie solely on WADA or the IPC. It applies to all of us. Someone needs to be held accountable to ensure that all athletes know when and where to get the information. We must be willing to put in the time, effort, and most importantly, money into ensuring that important anti-doping information is circulated and networked to those who need it most. The information needs to be accessible. It needs to be available in multiple languages, be available to read by persons with or without impairment, and be able to access freely by someone without a computer or internet access. Take the ATOM systems. It's a great tool, but not accessible to everyone around the world. If we as athletes are required to be accountable for everything we do, then please help us by ensuring we have the tools and proper equipment to do so. Most importantly, athletes want to be regularly reminded and provided with the relevant information. We want to be able to make an informed, educated, and safe choice for our bodies, for our sport. This is why the increase in number of athletes traveling around the world to compete internationally in recent years should be seized as opportunities to educate and inform. As the IPC found in August, the IPC Women Championships in Montreal, outreach activities and workshops and sporting events, training camps, and grassroots programs do so much to provide athletes and their support network with the right informed and right choice. Anti-doping is a huge issue affected by all levels of sport. We can all help providing the right safe choice for our athletes. To all stakeholders that are here today and around the world involved in sport, speaking on behalf of the athletes from around the world, I ask you to do what you can to provide outreach activities, communication, education, and accessible information to all of your athletes. Thank you for your time and attention. Please remember we all have a responsibility to ensure that sport remains a clean and safe sport for all of our athletes from grassroots to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. And the next intervention on behalf of the International Association of Athletics Federations will be made by Ms. Abby Hoffman. Abby is a council member of the IAAF.
Good morning. I'm speaking on behalf of the IAAF President Lamine Diack, the Council, our 212 member federations, and millions of participants in athletics around the world. Since the adoption of the current code in 2009, the IAAF has implemented an aggressive anti-doping campaign. We have been in the vanguard of new measures to combat doping. We have delivered a comprehensive intelligence-based testing program, implemented an athlete biological passport system which has concluded more than 20 doping violations in the last 12 months alone, stored samples and retested them using new methods, and successfully defended our results management system in front of CAS. The consequence is that today, 321 athletes are serving a period of ineligibility under IAAF rules, 296 of them with a sanction of 2 years or more. The fact that both high-profile and lesser-known athletes have been caught is a function of the success of our anti-doping program, not a reflection of failure. We are under no illusions about doping in our sport. We are determined to do whatever it takes to make athletics clean, fair, and credible, including working more closely with key member federations and national agencies to strengthen domestic anti-doping programs. We laud many of the proposed revisions to the code. I won't detail them here, but we congratulate WADA for modernizing the tools to fight doping. However, our support for the new code is not without reservation. We have concerns about the proposals on sanctions, and having sanctioned 500 athletes under the current code, we have considerable insight on this topic. The overwhelming majority of athletes in our sport have internalized the values of fair play and authenticity. Providing sport authorities deliver a level playing field, these athletes do not need to be deterred from the delusion and deception of doping. But for the minority who have chosen to cheat or who are tempted to do so, deterrence is critical. And deterrence takes two forms: the probability of being apprehended by increasingly sophisticated testing regimes, and the prospect, if caught, of facing significant penalties. Penalties are a critical element of the anti-doping campaign and must serve as an adequate and proportionate response to the nature and seriousness of the infraction that has been committed. Less serious infractions should command lesser penalties when it is clear they are unintentional. But proportionality works both ways. Severe penalties must equally be imposed for serious infractions. At our most recent Congress in Moscow this summer, our 200-plus member federations again unanimously expressed their support for 4-year bans, a view premised on the belief that significant penalties are a powerful deterrent. This is why we have used the aggravating circumstances provision of the code, and is why we have appealed lenient decisions from our national federations to CAS. Our principal concerns with the penalty regime in the new code are the following. First is the provision that 4-year sanctions may be reduced to 2 years by an athlete simply claiming no intention to cheat when the violations we are talking about are by their very nature intentional. There's no qualifying language in the code that requires athletes to provide any objective corroborating evidence beyond their own denial of intention. Our second concern is the proposal in Article 10.6, which would allow an athlete who has committed a serious doping violation to obtain a reduced sanction from 4 years down to 2 simply by admitting what has already been proven by an anti-doping organization or a federation. And our third concern is that the new code abandons the current concept of aggravating circumstances, such as evidence of a doping conspiracy, the use of multiple prohibited substances, or multiple occasions of use. This aggravating circumstances method has been effective in the IAAF. Our conclusion is clear. While the stated objective of the new code on penalties is to make longer and specifically 4-year penalties the norm, there is significant risk that provisions of the new code will undermine and work against the realization of that goal. We in athletics will do our part, but WADA has an oversight responsibility across all sports. WADA must take affirmative action to enforce the 4-year sanction, including appealing cases to CAS whenever 4 years has not been properly applied in serious cases. And CAS panels must similarly be prepared to enforce 4-year sanctions when the evidence before them is clear. If WADA and CAS act in this way, 4 years will truly mean 4 years. If they do not, we will all be dragged down to the lowest common denominator. In closing, I will just say only time will tell whether the sanction regime under the new code will make more severe penalties the norm. We recommend, therefore, that WADA commit now to a midterm review of sanctions to assess if the new code is delivering the intended outcomes with regard to 4-year sanctions. If it is not, WADA should commit to undertake an immediate further review of the sanctions provisions in the code. Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to bring forward the views of the IAAF to this conference.
Thank you, Abby. On behalf of the European Olympic Committee, Mr. Janez Kostanjancic will make the next intervention. He's an executive committee member. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I have the honor and privilege to speak to you in the name of the European Olympic Committees, an organization composed by the 49 national Olympic committees of Europe. We are, as you are probably aware, one of the smallest continents with less than 10% of the world population, but on the other side, we achieved 48% of the medals at the Beijing Olympic Games. We again achieved 48% of the medals at the London Olympic Games. Our share at the Winter Olympic Games is even higher. That's why we firmly support a policy of clean sport, and that's why we support 100% the policy of WADA. We stand firmly behind your organization, and we understand that the fight for clean sport, for the sport without doping, for the integrity of sport, and for the sport ethics should be even harder and even more efficient. I sincerely hope that this World Conference on doping in sport will make our organization more modern and more effective. The policy I'm speaking about is not only the policy of European sports bodies, of European Olympic committees and of the national Olympic committees. It's also widely supported by European athletes. We recently organized a European Sports Forum in Poreču, Croatia. The Olympic, the World, the European medalists supported 100% the policy of the anti-doping fight. I have the pleasure to inform you that they are asking all of us to be even stricter. And at the end, if you allow me, Europe was the only continent without continental games. It's going to be different from now on. We are organizing European Games in Baku, in Azerbaijan, in the year 2015, and we hope to have an excellent collaboration with WADA at the first European Games and further on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yanez. The intervention on behalf of World Archery will be given by the Secretary-General, Tom Dillon.
Dear President, dear Congress delegates, as representative of World Archery, it is my pleasure to present you the point of view of a lower risk sport, and we try to do what is necessary to keep our sport clean. In the first code, there was a need to have a uniform approach to the fight against doping. The second one was necessary to amend some mistakes shown in the cases that went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. However, we are pleased to see that finally the new proposed version proposes a code that accepts that it is not a one-size-fits-all. The concept of a risk assessment to determine the scope of testing is essential to have a proper fight and compliance monitoring. This risk assessment can only be done at an international level and by sport and/or sport discipline level. The risk assessment will require the necessary resources, but it is essential if we all want to be more efficient, and we are committed to invest those resources. If not, we continue with a quantitative approach that only is escalating costs. We also need to make sure that WADA does more to make sure that the performance of the laboratories is more consistent. On a more philosophical level, and also reflecting on the words of the WADA President yesterday and the IOC President this morning, what we are doing here is to protect the clean athletes. However, maybe then next time the conference should not be called the Conference on Doping, but the Conference on Clean Sport. This is how we see the matter in World Archery, which we also translate in our educational campaign, Say No to Doping and Shoot Clean. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. The next intervention on behalf of International Skating Union will come from Beatrice Feaster, who is the legal advisor for the ASU. Thank you.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the ASU supports most of the amendments for the 2015 WADA Code. However, the ASU does not agree with the increase of the standard sanction, the eligibility period, to 4 years. This is for the following concerns. The code itself says that it was drafted giving consideration to the principles of proportionality and human rights, and the legal opinion of Mr. Costa confirms this. But the fact that the rulemaker claims adherence to the principle of proportionality does not mean that the principle is actually respected, nor is an expert legal opinion conclusive. The real test takes place in the application of the rules by hearing panels, the CAS, state courts, the European Court of Human Rights, etc. The proportionality of 4 years in eligibility could be questioned, especially for the following reasons. 4 years is a long period of time, and depending on the sports discipline involved and the stage of the career of an athlete, it may practically mean to put an end to such career. Even though the standard 4 years would apply only to more serious cases, it is a lot to wait for 4 years. Sanctions for anti-doping violations are generally not considered criminal by their nature, but a court, when faced with a 4-year span, is still likely to take into consideration criminal sanctions for comparable criminal offenses, and this comparison could, at least in certain jurisdictions, lead to the conclusion that 4 years is disproportionate. This is all the more the case because the goal of excluding an athlete who had been suspended for an anti-doping rule violation from the next Olympic Games could be reached by more moderate rules, for example, by establishing that the last month of a suspension shall commence on the first day of the Olympic Games following the decision of the competent hearing body, or by just adding the next following Olympic Games to the standard sanction period. Our worry is a danger to the world system of fighting against doping. 4 years ineligibility could weaken the position of both WADA and the CAS. The amendment could bring about serious dilemmas for all competent hearing bodies and especially the CAS. On one hand, they are bound to apply the rules of WADA, but on the other, they must respect fundamental principles of law, including proportionality and human rights. If CAS in a given case should decide that 4 years is disproportionate and therefore deviate from the WADA code, the authority of WADA could be considerably undermined. If, on the other hand, CAS should apply the WADA code rules, despite having doubts about proportionality, this could lead to more challenges of the CAS as true independent arbitral tribunal, especially before the Swiss Federal Court, but also to an increased involvement on other state and international courts, based especially on ordre public considerations. This threatens CAS, WADA, and the entire worldwide fight against doping. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Pfister. I now invite Gunilla Lindberg, an IOC Executive Board member and the Secretary General of ANOC, to address the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, President. On behalf of ANOC and its President Sheikh Ahmed Al Fahad Al Sabah, I want to congratulate WADA and its drafting committee for all the work done with the new code. As representation of all the 204 national Olympic committees in the world, we feel the responsibility to reach out to all of them with the assistance of WADA. As former speakers has mentioned, we see the importance of education as very crucial. We need to reach out to everyone, also to the smallest NOCs in the world. We need a coordination between the NOCs, the NADOs, and the governments, especially in the smaller NOCs. ANOC thanks WADA also for the cooperation before London Games, which made it possible to have all 204 NOCs compliant before the Games. ANOC support the amendments of the code and look forward to very close cooperation also in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gunilla. Before inviting the next speaker to address you, there is a short video entitled The True Athlete, and that is a compilation of interviews with the WADA Athlete Committee members. So if we could have the video.
You know, I always like to tell athletes, take a step back and reflect, because you can use a lot of what you learn through sport in the rest of your life.
You learn a lot about self-criticism.
Team spirit, team atmosphere.
You learn a lot about your personality.
Working with others towards one common goal.
And sports was the only thing that I could see that unite people. When you stand on the line, everybody forgets about what color you are, where you're from, what economic background you come from, whether you're poor, whether you're rich.
The big, the small, the tall, the short, the fast.
It doesn't matter. Everybody's there to showcase their talent.
Everyone has their own position in the field.
That was, for me, was the beauty of sports. That sports does not put you in categories.
Every player has their own role.
Sports just develops your mind into just reaching out and trying your best.
You train more to be as fast as you can, as strong as you can.
So you learn what it is like to give 100% and the challenge of trying to be the best that you can be.
So I saw sports as my way out in getting a better life for myself.
It happens everywhere in society that people want to take a shortcut. They don't have money, so they want to steal. They don't have this, they want to kill. They don't have that, and they're not talented, so they want to take somebody else's spotlight. And we really have to guard against that and make sure that people understand we will put all resources in place to catch you, because it is wrong to be cheating.
I now invite three-time Australian Olympian in swimming and a member of the WADA Athlete Committee, Matt Dunn, to address you.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Dunn. I'm from Australia and from the sport of swimming. I was a swimmer on the Australian national team for 10 years, during which time I broke 4 world records and competed in 3 Olympic Games. My involvement in swimming did not end there, as I'm now a bureau member of FINA, the governing body of aquatics. As a competing athlete, your perspective is quite often insular and self-centred around very specific targets. It is often due to this that athletes seldom realise the time and passion that is applied behind the scenes so they can maintain this focus. As such, and with the benefit of hindsight, I'm now very appreciative of those that protected my pathway through sport and thank those that are now protecting the athletes of today. Providing a safe and level playing field is instrumental in ensuring this protected pathway, with the World Anti-Doping Code a key element. As a member of the WADA Athletes Committee for the past 2 years, I've been fortunate to have participated in the World Anti-Doping Code review. This involvement successfully allowed the athlete's perspective to be heard and considered in the context of other key stakeholder input. Most notable discussion items from the athlete's viewpoint throughout the World Anti-Doping Code review include to ensure appropriate sanctions are applied relative to the offence and sanction, that major doping offences should not only be tougher than they are today, but should also prohibit the athlete from partaking in career-high events such as the Olympic Games. To ensure the entourage and extended entourage is better and more thoroughly addressed by the revised WADA Anti-Doping Code, the World Anti-Doping Code. It is an unfortunate reality that in many cases the athlete entourage plays a role in athlete doping, and the entourage should therefore be subject to serious sanctions as well. The athlete's whereabouts system provides a strong deterrent for dopers while still being practical for the clean athletes of the world. To promote anti-doping education and prevention at all levels of the athlete's pathway, to ensure they fully understand all the negatives surrounding doping, how to protect themselves, and most importantly, the benefits of a clean playing field. Although we'll never be able to cover off every scenario, we can make every endeavour to do so now and in future revisions of the World Anti-Doping Code. As an ex-athlete, I hope all stakeholders will be able to use the new World Anti-Doping Code with maximum effect to protect all clean athletes and ensure a level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to invite the ISC Vice President and Australian Olympic Committee President John Coates to address you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I guess I'll speak as President of the Australian Olympic Committee here in congratulating the draftsmen on the amendments that are before us and expressing our full support for all of them, particularly the increases to the sanctions. I'd like to note, though, my pleasure that there's reference to investigations in Article 5, so we've now got testing and investigations, so that where we can investigate non-analytical information or intelligence that may lead to a violation being proven. We've been concerned about that for a long time in Australia. We've been lobbying our government to amend its legislation, its anti-doping legislation, to give it the power to compel a person to respond to a request for information or to give evidence by our anti-doping organisation. And we finally managed to get those amendments earlier this year, and to the extent that now, if the anti-doping organisation can issue a notice requiring an athlete or a support personnel member to attend an interview, to answer questions, to give information of a specified kind, or to produce documents of a specified kind where they think that this information may be relevant to the administration of the anti-doping scheme. I think this is very important and very strong legislation, and what I wanted to do was really highlight to the other governments of the world that just having reference to testing and investigation in the WADA Code isn't enough. These governments have to go out there now and give themselves the power to do what happened in the Armstrong investigations. USADA was able to get sworn testimony. We aren't all able to do that under our different legislative structures, and so amendments such as I commend amendments such as those of our government to you. The Australian Olympic Committee has gone one step further. We also have repeated those requirements in our team membership agreements for both athlete and athlete support personnel, and we've added the provision that they must attend an interview, answer questions, give information, produce documents, even if to do so might tend to incriminate them or expose them to a penalty. And on the point of penalties, I should mention that the Australian government has a penalty of $5,100 a day for every day that an athlete or a support personnel member refuses to comply. So it's pretty serious, and I'd commend that to other governments. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next is the chair of the Anti-Doping Committee of the International Paralympic Committee, Dr. Tony Pasquale, and a member of the WADA Foundation Board. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear delegates, as the global governing body for the Paralympic movement, the International Paralympic Committee wishes to congratulate WADA and the Code Project team for completing the significant task of reviewing the World Anti-Doping Code. It is imperative for the future global success of sport that athletes compete on a level and fair playing field, where success is determined by skill, fitness, power, endurance, tactical ability and mental focus, but not as a result of taking prohibited substances or methods, not by cheating. The integrity of sport and the rights of clean athletes must be protected at all costs, and I think we are all in agreement that there needs to be a harmonized approach to anti-doping in all sports, at all levels and in all countries. The Code is a comprehensive document that covers the vast majority of cases and circumstances. WADA should be applauded for what it has achieved in its 14 years of existence. The IPC adopts an athlete-centered approach, and the clarity in the rules and regulations is of the utmost importance to us. We would like to highlight one change, however, that we think should be made in the Code. It is in the definition of fault. The word disability should be changed to impairment, which is the correct term to be used, as it has been already done correctly in all other documents. That being said, the IPC is concerned that an athlete's impairment would allow the athlete to claim no fault. We recently had a case that involved a blind athlete, and the ruling body chose not to sanction the athlete since they believed that due to her impairment, she could not be held accountable to the anti-doping rules. To avoid situations such as those, we propose that the definition of fault either has an open expression such as any other particular consideration should be taken into account, or simply the direct connection to impairment is removed from the definition. Please carefully consider this suggestion in the final version of the Code. The IPC is a committed stakeholder to the WADA program. We look forward to welcoming you in March at the 2014 Paralympic Games in Sochi and future regional para-sport games. We also invite further collaboration with WADA, ADOs and other stakeholders. Finally, the IPC remains fully committed to continue our efforts to ensure all sport is clean and free from doping. We will ensure ongoing compliance to the World Anti-Doping Program across all our sports and look forward to the publication of a new version of the World Anti-Doping Code. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Next, on behalf of International Basketball Federation, the Secretary-General and member of the ISC, also a member of the WADA Foundation Board, Patrick Baumann. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear Chairman, dear delegates, I'd like, first of all, also similar to previous speaker, commend the thorough and lengthy consultation process that has taken place for this next code of WADA, where all members of the sports movement have been able to participate in various occasions over the past 24 months and giving their inputs, and also meet with the drafting team. I'd like to take a moment and underline the importance of, from my perspective now more with the hat as a Secretary General of an international federation, of Article 22.2 and the obligations of the signatories to the code. All international federations, and I think indeed all sports movement, has signed up to the code and adjusted its regulations and the regulatory framework to implement the code. So we're all code compliant since 10 years now. And it is also encouraging to see how many countries have signed the UNESCO Convention, and I'd like to congratulate also those countries that, as a consequence, have legislated, sometimes also in very strong ways in their own countries. The International Federation rules apply worldwide, but their efficiency can only be fully measured and enhanced if they're accompanied by the appropriate domestic legislations. Basketball, for example, has the privilege of having a lot of stars and talents in a well-known professional league in the United States. And when doping cases arise in this environment, for example with international athletes, result management is often very complex, if not even impossible. For example, we have to sue our own league to access files and information. And athletes may actually even escape sanctions. This is not necessarily helpful to the fight against doping. The Professional Basketball League there has a serious anti-doping program, but it is confined in an isolated and private environment. And it's not linked to the IF and WADA except for the Olympic Games and the World Championships. Instead, it's a chip on the negotiating table of a collective bargaining agreement, which creates problems to the league ownership. So the IF has no influence, and the league has no necessary incentive to tackle this. I would therefore like to ask and encourage, as much as we IFs have adopted all our rules and regulations as fast as it was required, those public authorities in those countries that have not yet legislated to legislate as soon as possible to fill such loopholes and force cooperation with all signatories of the code. This would be very helpful to my sport, on one hand, but certainly also to others, peers and in other IFs, and would take away that shadow that casts sometimes over our sports. And certainly it would help that partnership between government and sports movement, which we are all about in this conference and within WADA, and it would significantly contribute to WADA's own efforts from Montreal in the fight against doping. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Patrick. And the next intervention comes from the chair of the Athletes Commission from the ISC, also a former Olympian and a member of the WADA Foundation Board, Claudia Bockel.
Thank you, President. My name is Claudia Bockel. I'm an Olympic fencer. I won a silver medal at the 2004 Olympic Games and gold medals at World and European Championships. I studied chemistry, did research at the Cologne Anti-Doping Laboratory. All athletes who compete at the Olympic Games have a right to vote for their athlete representatives, and I was one of those elected in Beijing. My three main topics for being elected were athlete representation, dual career, and the fight against doping. There are several interest groups stating athletes should be able to take the illegal substance of cocaine, stating athletes don't want 4-year bans, stating athletes don't want a whereabouts system. Let me tell you from experience, athletes want strong sanctions. And no, athletes are obviously not too happy about filling out their whereabouts. But maybe my own example will allow you to understand our position, the position of clean athletes, the positions of athletes that are elected by their peers. When I started competing, my coach told me after I won my first competition that I would need to go to a doping control. I knew then that every time when I would be in the top 3 of a major competition, I needed to go to a doping control. On the other hand, it meant that if I wouldn't be in the top 3, I would not be tested. Sometimes someone came to the fencing center to conduct a doping test. They tested a bunch of athletes who just happened to be there. The ones who weren't there would be tested the next day or another day. This meant that if I wouldn't have shown up, it would have given me enough time to prepare to be clean for the upcoming doping test. Then things changed a little bit. At competitions, they would also randomly test someone from the top 64. This just meant that athletes who didn't want to be caught just didn't compete at certain competitions, and we saw it. Doping control officers started to call athletes before a doping test, again giving dirty athletes a chance to prepare to be clean at the doping test. It was good that NADOs were created, but we now had to fill out every quarter where we would be. I didn't like it. I was clean. And now I had to tell where I would be in the upcoming 3 months, as if I knew. I thought it was such a hassle. I then talked with many other athletes from many federations, and I realized that if I wouldn't do it, things would continue to go on as I described before. We would not be able to catch any dopers, and more importantly, we wouldn't keep any athletes from using doping. It is not only about the amount of athletes that we catch, it is also about the deterrent effect for athletes to get caught through the whereabouts system. At first, I had to send my whereabouts both to my international federation as well as to my national anti-doping agency. Things became easier when my international federation and the NADO aligned into one computer system. Not only good for me to fill it out once instead of twice, but also doping controls from different organizations could finally be aligned through that. Later, we had to provide 1 hour every day instead of the whole 24 hours. To make sure that I would be there, I always provided an hour that I would probably be in my bed sleeping. That meant that I could be tested early in the morning, but it also meant that I wouldn't make silly mistakes of not being at the right time at the right place. If athletes are expected to say in advance every 3 months where they are, and of course need to make last-minute changes to that, why is it only possible on a computer and not on the smartphone that many athletes, and probably all of you, so frequently use? Even though athletes can make mistakes, 2 filing failures without consequences, we don't want athletes to make those silly mistakes. We have to make it as easy as possible for them. But we want to catch the cheats, and we have discussed this at length during our IOC International Athletes Forum, and I am proud to say that all athletes' representatives unanimously supported strong bans for athletes convicted of a deliberate and aggravated doping offense. We actually wanted lifetime bans. Clean athletes do not want to compete against dirty athletes. Dear delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we have been involved in a code review process. But with this code review, the fight against doping is not finished. We all, governments, sports movement, need to continue to think of the clean athletes. We cannot just provide this legal document to athletes. We need to educate and inform athletes in an athlete-friendly way about the changes in the WADA code, and we need to explain to athletes what the implications are. We need to help the clean athletes to have the burden as little as possible on them by sharing information between anti-doping organizations, by prioritizing on the right technology for all those athletes that are providing their whereabouts, and by strongly sanctioning those who are cheating, be it athletes or any other member of the entourage. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. That brings us to the conclusion of our morning session. If I could just indicate a couple of things to you. We unfortunately have not been able to get the translation in order during the course of the morning, but every effort will be made during the lunchtime break for that to be available for you during the course of the afternoon, and that did require asking a couple of speakers to postpone their intervention this morning. They will, of course, be given the opportunity when it's possible for the service to be available at a later time. Lunch is downstairs where you were at morning tea, and that is on the ground level, or level O, in Exhibition Hall number 1. I should also indicate to you that those of you who have posed questions and made comments that require a response from the co-drafting team, they are noting those comments, and at the conclusion of all interventions, where appropriate, there will be a response given to you. Lastly, could I ask you to perhaps make a little bit better effort to be back here in your seats by 3 o'clock. It's a discourtesy to the first speaker at any session if people are walking around whilst that speaker is endeavouring to make the points in the intervention. So could you just watch your clocks? We'll try and give you a bit more warning or encouragement to get back in here, all seated and quiet by 3 o'clock. In the meantime, enjoy your lunch, and thank you for your attention this morning.